Room 401 of the Stanley Hotel has a closet. It's an ordinary closet, wooden door, simple handle. But for reasons no one can explain, that door opens on its own between 1 and 3 in the morning. Every single night, maintenance has replaced the hinges, adjusted the frame, and even installed a lock. The door still opens. A guest once pushed a heavy dresser in front of it before going to sleep. In the morning, the dresser was back in its original position, and the closet door was wide open. When she checked out, she told the front desk only one thing. She said, "Something in that closet watched me sleep." And it was smiling. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not a legend. It's not a campfire story. This happened to real people who walked into the Stanley Hotel as a normal family and walked out as something broken. And broken might be the kind word for it. So here's the thing about haunted places. Most of them, you hear stories, you read articles, you watch a few videos online, and you think you understand them. You feel like you've got a handle on the fear. You tell yourself it's old buildings and creaky floors and overactive imaginations. And for most places, that's probably true, but the Stanley Hotel is not most places. It sits at the edge of Estes Park, Colorado, backed up against the Rocky Mountains, like something that was placed there deliberately. Not by architects, but by the land itself. When you drive up to it, especially in the fall when the sky turns gray early and the trees go thin and skeletal, the building looks like it's been waiting for you. Not in a welcoming way, in a patient way, the way something waits when it knows you'll eventually come. The hotel was built in 1909 by a man named Freelan Oscar Stanley. He came to Colorado because he was dying, tuberculosis. Doctors in the East had basically told him to get his affairs in order. So he packed up his wife Flora and headed west, hoping the dry mountain air might buy him a few more years. And it did more than that. The climate cured him. He regained his strength, fell in love with Estes Park, and decided to build a grand hotel right there at the foot of the mountains. And grand it was, 140 rooms, Georgian Revival architecture, gleaming white columns, a concert hall where Flora, a talented pianist, would play for guests in the evening. It was elegant, it was ambitious, and from the very beginning, something about it wasn't quite right. Construction workers reported strange sounds during the build. Tools would go missing and reappear in rooms that hadn't been finished yet. One carpenter quit after claiming he heard a woman humming in an empty hallway at 4 in the morning. These stories were brushed off: altitude, fatigue, the thin mountain air playing tricks. But the stories never stopped. They just grew. Now I need to tell you about the Maguire family. And I want to be careful with how I do this, because this isn't a story I'm telling you for shock value. It's not designed to make you jump. It's the kind of story that gets under your skin slowly, like cold water seeping through a crack in the foundation. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too deep to drain. David and Karen Maguire were from Tulsa, Oklahoma, married 12 years, 2 kids. A boy named Caleb, who was 9, and a girl named Sophie, who had just turned 6. On paper, they were a normal American family. David worked in insurance claims. Karen was a part-time dental hygienist. They went to church on Sundays, grilled burgers on the 4th of July, and took one family vacation a year, usually somewhere modest, a lake cabin or a beach rental. But in the fall of 2019, David suggested something different. He'd read about the Stanley Hotel online, seen the ghost tour, the history, the connection to The Shining. He wasn't a horror fan exactly, but he was curious. And more than that, he thought it would be fun, something the kids would remember. A little spooky, a little exciting. Karen wasn't thrilled about the idea at first. She didn't like the thought of sleeping in a place famous for being haunted, especially with the kids. But David promised they'd keep it light. They'd do the day tour, take some photos, let the kids run around the grounds, and stay just 2 nights. 2 nights, that's all it was supposed to be. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The drive from Tulsa had taken about 10 hours, and the kids were restless. Caleb had his nose buried in a book the whole way, some adventure novel. And Sophie had been cycling between sleep and asking, "Are we there yet?" every 40 minutes. When the hotel finally came into view through the windshield, Karen said the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the quiet of a remote location, but a heavier kind of silence. The kind you feel in your chest. David parked the car and they all got out. The air was cold and thin. The mountains behind the hotel were half covered in mist. Sophie grabbed Karen's hand and said, "Mommy, that house is too big." Karen laughed. David took a photo. They walked inside. The lobby of the Stanley Hotel is exactly what you'd expect from a building that's over 100 years old and knows it. Dark wood paneling, antique furniture. A grand staircase that curves upward like it's inviting you somewhere you probably shouldn't go. There's a warmth to it, the kind that old hotels have, but underneath that warmth, there's something else. A watchfulness, like the walls are paying attention. They checked in at the front desk. The clerk was a young woman, polite, professional, and she gave them the standard rundown. Wi-Fi password, breakfast hours, checkout time. Then she handed David 2 key cards and said, almost as an afterthought, "You're in room 401. David didn't think anything of it at the time. He told me later that the room number meant nothing to him. He hadn't researched specific rooms. He didn't know that room 401 was one of the most actively reported rooms in the entire hotel. He didn't know about the closet door. He didn't know about Lord Dunraven. Let me explain that. Before Freelan, Stanley built his hotel. The land it sits on was originally claimed by a man known as Lord Dunraven, an Irish nobleman and adventurer who tried to buy up most of Estes Park in the 1870s. His methods were questionable. He used fraudulent land claims and dummy buyers to acquire thousands of acres. Eventually, the locals pushed back, and Dunraven lost control of the area. But the 4th floor of the Stanley Hotel, room 401 in particular, has long been associated with his presence. Or whatever is left of it. Guests in that room report shadows moving along the walls with no source. The smell of pipe tobacco in the middle of the night, furniture rearranging itself. And that closet door, the one that opens on its own between 1 and 3 in the morning. Staff members have confirmed it. Paranormal investigators have documented it. And the hotel, to its credit, doesn't try to hide it. They lean into the history. They offer ghost tour. They sell the experience. But experience is a strange word for what some people go through in that building. The Maguires settled into room 401 around 4 in the afternoon. It was a large room, nicely furnished, with a view of the mountains. Karen said it felt normal at first. Old, yes, a little creaky, but comfortable. Sophie immediately claimed the spot by the window and pressed her face against the glass. Caleb dropped his bag and asked if they could explore. David said sure. They spent the next 2 hours walking the hotel, the long hallways on the upper floors. The billiard room, the music room where Flora Stanley's piano still sits. Caleb was fascinated by everything. He kept asking questions about the building, about the ghosts, about Stephen King. David answered what he could and made up the rest, the way dads do when they don't want to admit they don't know something. Sophie was quieter. She held Karen's hand and didn't say much. At one point, they were walking down a hallway on the 3rd floor, and Sophie stopped. Just stopped dead in the middle of the corridor. Karen looked down at her and asked what was wrong. Sophie pointed at the far end of the hallway and said, "That lady is looking at us." Karen looked. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. She told Sophie it was just shadows, maybe a trick of the light from one of the old wall sconces. Sophie didn't argue, she just nodded and kept walking. But Karen said she noticed something in that moment that she couldn't explain. The air at the end of that hallway was colder, not slightly colder, noticeably colder. Like walking past an open freezer. She didn't mention it to David. That evening, they had dinner at the hotel's restaurant, Cascades. The food was good. The kids were tired from the drive and the exploring, and by 8 o'clock, both of them were fading. They went back to the room, got the kids into their pajamas, and put them to bed in the second bed near the window. David and Karen stayed up for a while, talking quietly. David said he was glad they'd come. Karen agreed, though she admitted the place had a strange energy. "It's just old," David said. "Old buildings feel weird, that's normal." Karen nodded. But she told me later that she didn't believe her own agreement. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off, like a picture hanging slightly crooked that you can't stop staring at. They turned off the lights around 10:30. The room was dark, except for a thin line of light coming from under the bathroom door, which they'd left on as a nightlight for Sophie. Karen fell asleep quickly. David didn't. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle. Old hotels make noise, that's a fact. Wood expands and contracts, pipes hum. The wind finds gaps in the windows and pushes through. David knew this. He told himself that's all it was, just a building breathing. But around midnight, he heard something that wasn't the building. It was footsteps. Not from the hallway, not from the room above, from inside their room. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor near the foot of the beds. David sat up. The room was dark. The kids were asleep. Karen was asleep. No one was walking. He reached for his phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty. Everything was exactly where it should be. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked the small closet near the entrance. The door was open. He stared at it. He was sure, absolutely sure, that he had closed it when they unpacked. He remembered hanging his jacket in there and pushing the door shut. Now it was open about 6 inches, not a lot, just enough to notice. Just enough to feel like something had pushed it from the inside. David closed the door. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the handle, and he felt something he couldn't rationalize. He felt like he was being watched, not from behind, not from across the room. From the other side of that door. Like something was standing inches away, separated by a thin piece of wood, and it was waiting. He went back to bed. He didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, Karen woke up. She didn't know why. There was no sound, no disturbance. She just opened her eyes and was immediately fully awake. She described it as being pulled out of sleep, like someone had grabbed her consciousness and yanked it to the surface. The first thing she noticed was the cold. The room had dropped in temperature. Not the gradual cool of a fall night in the mountains. This was sudden and sharp, like the air itself had changed composition. She could see her breath. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and looked around the room. The closet door was open again. Karen stared at it. She didn't know about David closing it earlier. She didn't know about the footsteps. All she knew was that door had been shut when they went to bed, and now it was open. Wider this time, maybe a foot, and from inside the closet she heard something. Breathing, not loud, not dramatic. Just slow, steady breathing, like someone standing quietly in the dark, taking long, measured breaths. Karen's heart began to pound. She wanted to wake David, but her body wouldn't move. She described it as a kind of paralysis, not sleep paralysis because she was fully awake, but something else. something that felt imposed from the outside, like a hand pressing down on her chest, not physically, but with intention. She lay there for what felt like minutes, listening to the breathing, watching the open closet, and then it stopped. The breathing just stopped, and the closet door slowly, without any wind or vibration, swung shut on its own. Karen didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, she told David about the breathing. She expected him to dismiss it, to do the logical husband thing and explain it away. But instead, his face went pale. He told her about the footsteps, about closing the closet door, about the feeling of being watched. They looked at each other across the breakfast table while the kids ate pancakes, and something passed between them. A silent question, should they leave? But here's the thing about fear in the daylight. It shrinks, the sun was up, the hotel was buzzing with other guests. The mountains were beautiful through the dining room windows. And both David and Karen did what most people do when the rational mind regains control. They told themselves it was nothing, old building, weird acoustics, mountain air. Altitude affecting their sleep. They had paid for 2 nights, and they were going to stay for 2 nights. That decision is the one that haunts them. The second day was mostly uneventful. They drove into Estes Park, walked around the shops, had lunch at a little cafe near the river. Sophie found a stuffed elk in a gift shop and wouldn't let go of it. Caleb bought a postcard of the Stanley Hotel and wrote on the back, "Dear Grandma, we're staying in a haunted hotel." It's awesome, normal family stuff, good memories being made in real time. They got back to the hotel around 4 in the afternoon. As they walked through the lobby, Caleb spotted a sign for the evening ghost tour and begged to go. David was hesitant, Karen was firmly against it. But Caleb was persistent, in the way that 9-year-old boys are when they've decided something matters. And eventually, they compromised. David would take Caleb on the tour. Karen would stay with Sophie in the room. The tour started at 7. David and Caleb joined a group of about 15 people in the lobby. The guide was a man in his 40s, a hotel employee who clearly enjoyed his job. He had a deep voice and a knack for dramatic pauses. He walked them through the history of the hotel, the construction, the Stanley family, the early guests, the incidents. He told them about Elizabeth Wilson and room 217. He told them about the children's laughter heard on the 4th floor, believed to be the ghosts of children who once played in the hotel when it served briefly as housing. He told them about the tunnel system beneath the building, originally used for utilities and staff movement, now sealed off. And he told them about room 401. When the guide mentioned room 401, Caleb tugged on David's sleeve and whispered, "Dad, that's our room." David nodded. He didn't whisper back. The guide said that room 401 had the highest concentration of reported activity in the hotel. He said guests had photographed unexplained shadows, recorded voices on audio equipment, and felt physical sensations like cold spots and pressure on the chest. He said that one guest had woken up to find all the furniture in the room rearranged while she slept, and that another had seen a figure standing at the foot of the bed. A tall man in dark clothing who vanished when the lights were turned on. David felt Caleb's grip tighten on his arm. The guide said something else that stuck with David. He said that the Stanley Hotel wasn't haunted in the way most people think of haunted. He said the building didn't just contain ghosts. He said it contained energy. Residual energy from over a century of human experience. Joy, grief, fear, death. He said the hotel absorbed it all like a sponge, and some people, certain people, were more sensitive to that energy than others. Children especially, the guide said. Children pick up on things adults have learned to ignore. David thought about Sophie stopping in the hallway, about the lady she said was looking at them, about how quiet she'd been since they arrived. The tour ended at 8:30. David and Caleb walked back to the room. Caleb was buzzing with excitement, talking a mile a minute about everything the guide had said. David was quieter. He kept thinking about what the guide had said about children, about sensitivity, about things adults learn to ignore. When they got back to the room, Karen was sitting on the bed. Sophie was asleep in the other bed, curled up with her new stuffed elk. The room was warm, the lights were on, everything looked fine. But Karen's face didn't look fine. She waited until Caleb was in the bathroom brushing his teeth. And then she told David what had happened while they were gone. She said that around 7:15, shortly after David and Caleb had left for the tour, Sophie had been playing on the floor near the window. Karen was reading a book on the bed. The room was quiet, normal. Then Sophie started talking, not to Karen, not to herself. To someone Karen couldn't see. Karen looked up from her book and saw Sophie sitting cross-legged on the floor, facing the corner of the room near the closet, having a conversation. She was nodding, giggling, responding to questions that only she could hear. Karen put her book down and said, "Sophie, who are you talking to?" Sophie looked over her shoulder with a completely natural expression and said, "The man." "What man?" Karen asked. "The man in the corner. He's nice. He says he used to live here before the hotel." Karen's blood went cold. She looked at the corner. There was nothing there. No shadow, no shape, nothing. Just the wall and the edge of the closet door. "Sophie, there's no one there." Sophie turned back to the corner and giggled again. Then she said something that made Karen grab her phone and almost call David immediately. Sophie said, "He says you can't see him because you're not listening." Karen got up from the bed, walked over to Sophie and picked her up. Sophie didn't resist, but she looked back at the corner as Karen carried her to the bed. And then she waved, a small, casual wave, the kind a child gives to a friend when they're leaving a playdate. "Bye-bye," Sophie said to the empty corner. "I'll talk to you later." Karen held Sophie until she fell asleep. She didn't read, she didn't look at her phone. She just sat there, watching the corner, watching the closet door, and waiting for David to come back. When David heard this, he didn't rationalize it. He didn't say it was imagination or an imaginary friend or a game. Something in him shifted. The same man who had laughed about ghost stories in the car, who had suggested this trip as a fun adventure, that man was gone. In his place was a father who understood, on a level deeper than logic, that something in this room was wrong. Something was reaching out to his daughter, and his daughter was reaching back. He wanted to leave, right then, pack the bags, wake the kids, get in the car and drive through the night back to Oklahoma. But Karen talked him down. It was almost 9. The kids were exhausted. The roads through the mountains at night were dangerous, especially in October when frost could coat the asphalt without warning. They would leave first thing in the morning, 6 a.m. checkout, just one more night. One more night, David agreed, but he made a decision he didn't tell Karen about. He was not going to sleep. He was going to sit up in that chair by the window and watch the room all night. Watch the closet, watch the corner, watch his children. Whatever was in this room, whatever was talking to his daughter, it would have to go through him. He set himself up in the armchair around 10. Karen and the kids were in bed. The lights were off, except for the bathroom nightlight. The room was quiet. David sat there with his phone in his lap, fully dressed, shoes on, ready to move at a moment's notice. For the first hour, nothing happened. The hotel settled around him, its usual symphony of creaks and groans. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window gently. David watched the closet door. It stayed closed. He watched the corner where Sophie had been talking. Nothing there. By 11:30, his eyelids were getting heavy. The adrenaline from Karen's story was fading, and the exhaustion from 2 nights of poor sleep was pulling at him. He stood up and walked to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and came back to the chair. At midnight, the temperature in the room dropped. It happened fast. One moment, the room was comfortable, the forced air heating humming softly through the vent. The next moment, David could see his breath. He looked at the vent. It was still blowing, but the air coming out was cold, not cool, cold. Like something had reached into the heating system and removed all the warmth. David stood up. He walked to the vent and put his hand over it. The air was frigid. He backed away and looked around the room. The kids were under their blankets, still sleeping. Karen was on her side, also sleeping. The room was dark and cold and still. Then the closet door opened. Not slowly this time, not the gradual, inch-by-inch creep they'd experienced the night before. It swung open fully, quickly, like someone had pulled it from the inside. It hit the wall with a soft thud and stayed open. David stared at the closet. It was dark inside. The bathroom light didn't reach it. He could see the outline of his jacket hanging there, and Karen's coat, and the kids' backpacks on the floor. But behind those things, deeper in the closet, there was something else. A shape. Not a clear shape, not a person standing there, more like a density in the darkness. A place where the darkness was darker than it should be. Like the shadow of something that wasn't casting a shadow. David stared at it, and as he stared, he felt that same sensation from the night before. The feeling of being watched, but stronger now, much stronger. And accompanied by something new, a feeling of invitation. That's how he described it later, not threatening, not aggressive, just inviting. Like the darkness was offering something, like it was saying, come closer, come see. And the worst part, the part that David told me with his hands shaking, was that he wanted to. For a split second, maybe two, he wanted to walk into that closet. He wanted to step into that deeper darkness and see what was there. The pull was almost physical. He didn't move. He gripped the arms of the chair and he didn't move. And then Sophie sat up in bed. She sat up the way children sometimes do in the middle of the night. Straight up, eyes open, but not awake. That glassy, unfocused look of a child caught between sleep and consciousness. David froze. He watched her. Sophie turned her head and looked at the open closet. Then she smiled. He's here, she whispered. David's heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He whispered back, Sophie, lie down. But Sophie wasn't listening to him. She was swinging her legs over the side of the bed, moving toward the closet. Moving toward that shape in the darkness, David launched himself out of the chair. He crossed the room in 3 steps, scooped Sophie up, and pulled her against his chest. She didn't fight him, she didn't cry. She just kept looking at the closet over his shoulder, and she kept smiling. He wants to show me something, Daddy, she said. He says there's a room underneath. David carried her to the bed. He woke Karen. He turned on every light in the room. And in the sudden flood of brightness, the closet was empty. Just jackets and backpacks, no shape, no density, no deeper darkness. But the room was still cold, and the closet door was still open. Karen looked at David's face and didn't ask any questions. She understood. She got up, started packing. They moved fast, silently. The way people do when the argument about whether to stay or go has already been settled by something beyond words. It was 12:40 in the morning. They packed everything in under 10 minutes. David carried Sophie, who had fallen back asleep almost immediately after he'd pulled her from the bed. Karen carried Caleb's bag and her own. Caleb woke up enough to walk, but was still half asleep, stumbling along, confused. They left the room. David pulled the door shut behind him and didn't look back. The hallway was empty. The hotel was quiet. Their footsteps on the old carpet sounded muffled, swallowed by the silence. They walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and crossed to the front desk. A night clerk was there, a different person from the one who'd checked them in. David told him they were checking out early. The clerk nodded. He didn't seem surprised. He processed the checkout without comment, and David thought he saw something in the man's eyes. Not amusement, not pity, recognition, like he'd seen this before. Like families leaving room 401 in the middle of the night was not unusual. They walked out the front doors of the Stanley Hotel at 1 in the morning. The parking lot was dark. The mountains were invisible behind the clouds. The air was cold, but it was a different cold, a natural cold, clean. Not the suffocating, heavy cold of the room. David loaded the car. Karen strapped the kids into their seats, and as David walked around to the driver's side, he looked back at the hotel. He looked up at the fourth floor, at the window of room 401. There was a figure in the window. It was dark, indistinct, just a shape against the faint light of the room they'd left behind. But it was there, standing at the window, looking down at them. David got in the car and drove. They drove through the night, down the mountain roads, through the darkness of the Colorado plains, and into the flat, open expanse of Kansas. They didn't stop until they hit a gas station near Wichita at 5 in the morning. Karen took the kids inside to use the restroom. David stood by the car, pumping gas, watching the sun come up, and trying to convince himself that it was over. But standing there, in the cold morning light of a Kansas gas station, 400 miles from the Stanley Hotel, David felt something that made his stomach drop. He felt like he was still being watched. And in the back seat of the car, Sophie's stuffed elk was sitting upright in her car seat. She hadn't placed it that way. It had been lying on its side when they left. David was sure of it. He stared at the elk for a long moment, then reached in and laid it down. When he pulled his hand back, his fingers were cold, not gas station morning cold. Room 401 cold. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. Now here's where I need to pause, because this story doesn't end with the Maguires leaving the Stanley Hotel. That would be too simple. That would follow the rules of how haunted places are supposed to work. You go in, something scares you, you leave, it's over. But what happened to the Maguire family after they got home is the part of this story that I cannot stop thinking about. It's the part that keeps me up at night, and it's the part I'm going to tell you next. Because the Stanley Hotel has 140 rooms, it has a history stretching back over a century. It has its ghosts and its legends and its tour and its gift shop. But what most people don't understand, what the brochures and the websites and the TV specials never tell you, is that some places don't just hold onto their dead. Some places let them go, and once something from the Stanley Hotel decides to follow you home, there is no checkout time. There is no distance far enough. There is no door you can close that it can't open. The Maguires learned that. And what happened in their house in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the weeks after they returned from Colorado, is something that no one, not the hotel, not the investigators, not the family themselves, has ever been able to explain. That is coming in the next part, and I promise you, what you've heard so far is only the surface. Joel did not leave room 418 that night. He should have. Every rational nerve in his body told him to step backward, pull the door shut, walk downstairs, get in his truck, and drive until the Stanley Hotel was nothing but a white speck in the rearview mirror. But he did not. He stood in that doorway, gripping the frame with both hands. And he looked at the small figure standing in the moonlight. And he did what any father would do. What any father who had buried his child and spent 2 years drowning in the silence she left behind would do. He stayed Maya, his voice came out broken, barely a whisper. Like a word that had been locked inside his chest for too long and had forgotten how to be spoken. The girl did not move. She stood by the window, her bare feet on the carpet, her hands at her sides. The moonlight caught the edges of her hair and made it glow slightly, the way it used to when she sat by the window in the morning and the sun hit her just right. Maya, is that really you? She tilted her head again, that tilt. Joel had seen it 10,000 times. It was hers. It was uniquely, unmistakably hers, the way she angled her chin slightly to the left and looked at him with those wide, patient eyes, as if she was waiting for him to catch up to something she already understood. "You took so long, Daddy," she said. Her voice was small and clear, no echo, no distortion, just the voice of a little girl talking to her father in a dark room. Joel's legs carried him forward, 2 steps, 3, he was inside the room now. The cold wrapped around him like water, his breath came out in small white clouds. But he did not care. He did not care about the cold or the dark or the fact that this was impossible. Because she was right there, 5 feet away, close enough to touch. He reached out his hand, and the room went black. The moonlight vanished, not dimmed, not obscured, but vanished, as if someone had pulled a curtain across the sky. The cold doubled. Joel gasped. He could not see anything. He stood with his hand extended in total darkness and felt the air change around him. It thickened, pressed against his skin, filled his ears with a low, subsonic hum that he felt more in his teeth than in his hearing. Then the moonlight returned, slowly, like a dimmer switch being turned up. Maya was gone. Joel stood alone in the middle of room 418. His hand was still extended, reaching for nothing. The room was exactly as it had been: bed, desk, armoire, window. No child. No pajamas, no gray-green eyes. He stayed there until his arms started to ache from being held out. Then he lowered it. Then he sat on the floor with his back against the bed, and he did not move until morning light started coming through the window and the birds outside started their indifferent songs. He did not tell anyone what he saw, not Doris, not Thomas, not Patricia. He went through his day like a sleepwalker, checking pipes, testing radiators, replacing a section of weather stripping on a first-floor window that had come loose. His body did the work, while his mind replayed those 45 seconds in room 418 on an endless loop. Her voice, her face, her tilt. "You took so long, Daddy." By evening, Joel had convinced himself of 2 contradictory things simultaneously. First, that what he had seen was not real. That it was grief, exhaustion, suggestion, Dory's story about Frank, Thomas's theories about emotional residue, the isolation of an old building in winter, all of it combining to produce a hallucination so vivid it had felt like contact. Second, and at the same time, with equal conviction, that it was real. That Maya had been standing in that room, that she had spoken to him, that she was still there, waiting, and that if he went back, she would be there again. He knew he could not hold both of these beliefs at once. He knew that one of them had to be wrong, but grief does not follow the rules of logic. It never has. Grief is the one part of the human mind that operates entirely outside the jurisdiction of reason. And it had been running Joel's life for 2 years, whether he admitted it or not. At 11 that night, he started his walkthrough. 1st floor, 2nd floor. 3rd floor, he moved through each hallway with mechanical precision, checking doors, testing handles, listening. Everything was normal, everything was fine. He reached the 4th floor. He walked to room 418 and stopped. He could feel it, through the door, a pull. Not physical, nothing was dragging him forward. But something in his chest was leaning toward that door the way a compass needle leans toward north. A directional certainty that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with want. He put his key in the lock, turned it, pushed the door open. The room was empty. Cold, dark, empty. No moonlight this time. The sky outside was overcast, thick with clouds that promised snow by morning. Joel stood in the doorway and looked at nothing, and felt stupid and devastated in equal measure. He closed the door, locked it, finished his walkthrough, went to bed. At 3 in the morning, the humming started again. Joel lay in his bed and listened. The same tuneless, wandering melody, drifting down from above, from the 4th floor. From room 418, he did not go up, not that night. He lay in bed and listened until it stopped, and then he lay in the silence that followed, which was somehow worse. The next night he went up, and she was there, same room. Same moonlight, the clouds had cleared. And the silver light fell through the window in that same clean bar across the floor. Same blue pajamas with white stars, same messy brown hair, same gray-green eyes. But this time she was sitting on the bed, cross-legged. The way she used to sit when Joel read her bedtime stories. She was holding something in her hands, he could not see what, and she looked up when he entered and smiled. That smile, Joel felt it in his knees. "Hi, Daddy." "Hi, baby," the words came out before he could think about them. Automatic, the most natural words he had ever spoken. "Will you sit with me?" Joel walked to the bed. He sat on the edge, about 2 feet from where she sat. He could see her clearly now, the freckles on her nose. The small scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike. The way her bottom lip stuck out slightly when she was concentrating. Every detail was perfect. Every detail was Maya. She was holding a dandelion. A single white dandelion, full and round, ready to be blown. "Where did you get that?" Joel asked. "I found it," she said. "There are lots of them here." "It's November, sweetheart. Dandelions don't grow in November." She looked at him with that patient expression again. "They do here." Joel stared at the dandelion. It was real. He could see the individual seeds, each one attached to its tiny parachute of white fluff. It was perfect, impossible and perfect. "I miss you," Joel said. The words cracked on their way out. "I miss you so much, Maya. Every single day." She looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted behind her eyes. Something he could not name, a flicker, like a candle flame caught in a draft. It was there, and then it was gone, and she was smiling again. "I know, Daddy. But you don't have to miss me, I'm right here." Joel reached out to touch her hand. His fingers passed through empty air. Where her hand should have been, there was nothing. He felt cold, a deep, bone-level cold that shot up his arm and into his shoulder and made his teeth ache. He pulled his hand back. Maya looked at his hand, then at him. "Not yet," she said softly, "but soon." The moonlight went out again. That same sudden, total darkness. When it returned, she was gone. Joel sat on the bed in room 418 for a long time. He looked at the spot where she had been sitting. The bedspread was smooth, undisturbed, no indentation, no warmth. Nothing to prove that anything had been there at all. Except on the pillow, resting in the center of the white cotton, was a single dandelion seed. One tiny, perfect, impossible seed. Joel picked it up and held it in his palm and felt his heart doing something it had not done in 2 years. It was hoping. He started going to room 418 every night. Not during his walkthroughs, those he conducted normally, professionally, making sure everything was in order. But afterward, at 1 or 2 in the morning, he would climb the stairs to the 4th floor and let himself into that room and wait. She did not always come. Some nights the room stayed dark and empty and cold. And Joel would sit on the bed for an hour, 2 hours, 3, waiting for a voice or a shadow or a flicker that never arrived. Those nights were the worst, worse than anything. The absence was physical, a weight on his chest, a tightness in his throat. The specific suffocating despair of having found something and then losing it again. But other nights she was there, and those nights were everything. She told him about the hotel, about the hallways and the rooms and the other people. She never said ghosts, never said spirits, just other people who lived in the walls and the floors and the spaces between things. She said they were nice. She said they told stories. She said there was a woman on the 3rd floor who played the piano even though there was no piano, and a man on the 2nd floor who walked up and down the hall looking for his dog. "Are you happy here?" Joel asked her one night. He was sitting on the floor now. He had started sitting on the floor because it brought him closer to her height, made the conversations feel more natural, more like the ones they used to have. Maya considered this question with the seriousness only a child can bring to a simple question. "It's okay," she said, "but I liked home better." "I liked home better too," Joel said. "Then why did you leave?" Joel closed his eyes, because home didn't feel like home anymore. "Not without you." She was quiet for a while, then she said, "Daddy, do you want to stay here with me?" Joel opened his eyes. She was looking at him with that tilt, that patient, curious tilt, and for one terrible, beautiful, crystalline moment, the answer was yes. Yes, absolutely yes. He wanted to stay in this room in this hotel with this impossible version of his daughter forever. He wanted to close the door and lock it and never leave and let the world outside do whatever it was going to do without him. "Yes," he whispered. Maya smiled, but it was not quite her smile. Something about it was different, wider, maybe, or the wrong temperature. Like a photograph of a smile rather than a smile itself. And those gray-green eyes, for just a fraction of a second. So fast he almost did not register it, flickered to something darker. Something older, then it was gone, and she was Maya again. "Good," she said. "Stay." Joel did not sleep that night. He sat in his room and stared at the collection of dandelion seeds on his desk, 7 of them now. One from each night she had appeared, and felt the competing currents of joy and dread pulling him in opposite directions. Thomas Brennan found him the next morning. Joel was in the maintenance office, pretending to organize tools. Thomas walked in without knocking, which was unusual. He was carrying his laptop. "Joel, I need to show you something." Thomas set the laptop on the workbench and opened it. On the screen was a graph, a series of jagged lines in different colors plotted against a timeline. "These are my EMF readings from the past 2 weeks, Thomas said. "I have sensors placed throughout the hotel, lobby, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor. Most of them show normal baseline activity. Small fluctuations, nothing significant." He pointed to one of the lines, a red one. "This is the sensor on the 4th floor, outside room 418. The red line was different from the others. It showed a baseline that was mostly flat, but with massive, irregular spikes, tall. Jagged peaks that shot up and then dropped back down. Joel counted them, 7 spikes, over the past 2 weeks. "When do those spikes occur?" Joel asked, even though he already knew the answer. Thomas looked at him, between 1 and 3 in the morning. "Every 2 or 3 nights, and they're getting stronger, Joel. The first spike was barely above baseline. The most recent one was the highest electromagnetic reading I have ever recorded in this building. In 6 years of study," he paused. "What are you doing on the 4th floor at 1 in the morning?" Joel said nothing. Thomas closed the laptop slowly. He pulled up a stool and sat down across from Joel and folded his hands the way someone does when they are about to say something they have been thinking about for a long time. "I told you my theory about the hotel, about how it absorbs emotional residue and becomes reactive. I believe that, I stand by it. But there is a part of the theory I did not tell you, because honestly, it scares me. Joel looked at him. If the hotel is reactive, if it responds to the emotional states of the people inside it, then it follows that the stronger the emotion, the stronger the response. Grief, Joel, grief is the strongest emotion there is, stronger than fear, stronger than anger. Grief is the only emotion that never fully goes away. It just changes shape. And a building that feeds on emotion, a building that has been absorbing emotion for 115 years, would be drawn to grief the way a flame is drawn to oxygen. Thomas leaned forward. Whatever is happening to you in room 418, it is not random. The hotel chose you. It chose your grief, and whatever it is showing you up there, it is not giving you something. It is taking something. Every time you go into that room, every time you engage with whatever is in there, you are feeding it. And it is getting stronger. Joel stood up. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you have lost weight. I know that you have dark circles under your eyes that were not there 2 weeks ago. I know that you have stopped eating dinner. I know that you walk through this building like you are already halfway somewhere else. Thomas's voice was not angry. It was afraid. Joel, I have studied this hotel for 6 years. I have never seen readings like this. Whatever is in that room, it is pulling from you. And I am genuinely worried about what happens when there is nothing left to pull. Joel picked up a wrench, set it down, picked it up again. His hands were shaking. She's my daughter, he said quietly. Thomas went very still. What? My daughter. Maya, she died 2 years ago. She's in that room. I see her, I talk to her. She knows things only she would know, the way she tilts her head. The scar on her chin, the humming, it's her Thomas. Thomas stared at him for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that made Joel want to break something. It's not her, Joel, I'm sorry, I'm so deeply sorry, but it's not her, it's the hotel. It found your grief and it built something out of it, a shape, a voice, a face. But it is not your daughter. It is an echo wearing your daughter's face, because that is the face most likely to keep you coming back. Joel set the wrench down with enough force to dent the workbench. Get out. Thomas left. Joel did not go to room 418 that night. He stayed in his room and he paced, and he argued with himself, and he held Maya's photograph, and he tried to think clearly, but clarity kept slipping away from him like water through his fingers. Thomas was wrong. He had to be wrong. Because if Thomas was right, then what Joel had been feeling, that warmth, that connection, that impossible, miraculous sense of being close to his daughter again, was a lie. A trick, a hotel using a dead child's face to feed on a broken man's grief. And Joel could not accept that. Accepting that would mean losing Maya again. And he could not survive losing her again. The first time had nearly killed him. The second time would finish the job. He went to room 418 the following night. She was there, sitting on the bed, holding a dandelion. You didn't come last night, she said. There was something in her voice, not anger. Not hurt, something closer to hunger. I know, I'm sorry, baby. Don't do that again, Daddy. Please, I don't like it when you don't come. I won't, I promise. She smiled. And this time Joel was sure of it. The smile was wrong, not dramatically wrong. Not obviously wrong. Just slightly off, the way a note can be slightly flat, and most people would not notice, but a trained ear would catch it. The proportions were right, the shape was right, but the feeling behind it was not warmth. It was something else, something that looked like warmth, the way a painting of a fire looks like warmth. Joel sat down on the floor. He was tired, bone tired. The kind of tired that sleep does not fix, because it is not a physical tiredness. It is a tiredness of the self, a wearing down, an erosion. Maya, he said. What happens if I stay? She looked at him. We'll be together. But what does that mean? Stay how? Stay here in this room. Stay here with me. With us, she gestured vaguely at the walls, the floor, the air. In the hotel. And what happens to me, my body? She did not answer right away. She looked down at the dandelion in her hands, turned it slowly. You won't need it anymore, she said. The words hit Joel like cold water. He sat very still and looked at this thing, this beautiful, perfect, terrible thing that wore his daughter's face and spoke with his daughter's voice and knew his daughter's mannerisms, and he felt two things at once. Love and terror, because Thomas was right, he knew it now. Knew it the way you know something in your stomach before your brain catches up. Whatever this was, it was not Maya. Maya would never ask him to die. Maya, even at 6 years old, even in pain, even at the end, had squeezed his hand and said, "It's okay, Daddy." She had comforted him. A dying child had comforted her father because that was who she was. She was kind. She was generous. She was selfless in the way that only very young children and very old souls can be. And this thing sitting on the bed was none of those things. It was wearing Maya like a costume, using her face, her voice, her mannerisms, all the details it had pulled from Joel's grief, all the memories it had harvested from his sleepless nights and his tears and his desperate, aching need to see her one more time. It had built a puppet from his pain and dangled it in front of him and waited for him to reach for it. And he had, over and over, he had reached for it. Joel stood up slowly. The thing on the bed watched him. Its eyes, Maya's eyes, but not Maya's eyes, tracked his movement with a stillness that was not childlike, was not human. Where are you going? It asked. I'm leaving. No, the voice changed. Not completely, just a shade, a degree. The softness hardened at the edges. You said you would stay. I know what I said. You promised. Joel backed toward the door. His hand found the handle behind him. The brass was so cold it burned. You can't go, Daddy. The thing stood up on the bed. It was taller now, not much. Just enough to be wrong. Just enough to break the illusion if you were looking for it. You can't leave me again. And there it was, the weapon. The one word that could cut through every defense Joel had built. Again. You can't leave me again. Because that was exactly what Joel's guilt told him every single day. That he had left her. That he had kissed her forehead and turned off the light and left her alone with a fever that was eating her alive, and he did not come back in time. Joel's hand tightened on the door handle. Tears were running down his face. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. You're not Maya, he said. The thing's face changed. The mask slipped. Just for a second, less than a second, the face was something else. Something old and dark and empty, like looking into a well that has no bottom. Then it was Maya again, smiling, tilting her head. Of course I am, Daddy. Don't be silly. Maya would never ask me to die, Joel said. His voice was shaking, but the words were steady. Maya would want me to live. She would want me to be okay. She told me it was okay. Those were the last words she ever said to me. It's okay, Daddy, and I have spent 2 years not believing her. But she was right, and you are wrong, and you are not my daughter. The room changed. The temperature dropped so fast Joel's breath crystallized in the air in front of him. The walls seemed to lean inward. The moonlight flickered like a failing bulb. The thing on the bed was no longer sitting. It was standing on the floor now, and it was closer, much closer, though Joel had not seen it move. You don't get to leave, it said, and the voice was not Maya's anymore. It was not anyone's. It was the voice of the building itself, deep, resonant, layered. as if every voice that had ever echoed in these hallways was speaking at once. "You came here broken, you are mine." Joel turned the handle, pulled the door open. The hallway outside was dark, darker than it should have been. The wall sconces were out, every single one. The hallway was a tunnel of black. Behind him, the thing took a step forward. The floor creaked under a weight that a 6-year-old should not have. Joel stepped into the dark hallway. He walked. He did not run. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed run, but he did not. He walked, one foot in front of the other, hands against the wall to guide him. Moving through the dark 4th-floor hallway of the Stanley Hotel, while behind him the door to room 418 stood open, and something stood in the doorway and watched him go. He reached the stairs, started down, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor. The lights were on down here, warm and golden and normal. The lobby was quiet. The front desk was empty. The old clock on the wall said 4:17 in the morning. Joel walked to the maintenance office. He sat down at the workbench. He put his head in his hands. He sat like that until the sun came up. Doris found him at 7. She took one look at him and went to the kitchen and came back with coffee, black, and a piece of toast. She set them in front of him and sat down across from him and waited. Joel told her everything. He told her about Maya, about the fever and the hospital and the flatline and the divorce and the guilt and the 2 years of drowning. He told her about the ball and the humming and the handprint on the window. He told her about room 418, about the thing that looked like his daughter, about the dandelion seeds, about what it asked him to do. Doris listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I stopped going to the 3rd floor 8 years ago." Joel looked at her. "I told you I hear Frank sometimes. That is true, but what I did not tell you is that I used to see him. In room 301, standing by the window, sitting in the chair. Lying on the bed, with his hands behind his head, the way he always used to lie. I used to go and sit with him 2-3 times a week, for years. And he would talk to me, and I would talk to him. And it was the closest thing to happiness I had felt since he died." She paused, took a breath, then one night he asked me to lie down next to him on the bed. And I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to more than I have ever wanted anything. But something in his voice, something was off. Like a word pronounced wrong by someone who learned a language from a book instead of from listening. And I looked at his eyes, and for 1 second they were not Frank's eyes. They were dark, not brown dark, empty dark, and I understood. She folded her hands on the table. I never went back to that room, and it took everything I had, every single thing. Because the want does not go away, Joel. The hotel put that want inside me, or maybe it just found the want that was already there and made it louder. Either way, it is still here. She pressed her hand against her chest. Every single day, I want to go up those stairs and open that door and see him one more time. And I don't, and it is the hardest thing I do. She looked at Joel with eyes that were not hard anymore. Not disappointed, just tired, tired in the same deep, structural way that Joel was tired. "You have to stop going to that room," she said, "and then you have to leave this hotel. Not next week, not next month, soon, because the longer you stay, the harder it gets. And some people don't get out." "What happens to them?" Joel asked. Doris did not answer, but her eyes flicked, just for a moment, to a photograph on the wall of the maintenance office. A group photo, staff from some year Joel did not recognize. 12 people standing on the front porch of the hotel, smiling. Joel had seen the photo before, but never looked at it closely. He looked now. In the back row, barely visible, there was a man, young, maybe mid-20s. Thin face, dark eyes, he was not smiling. He was looking at the camera with an expression that Joel recognized, because he had seen it in his own mirror. The expression of someone who had found what they were looking for and was terrified of what it was going to cost. "Who is that?" Joel asked. Doris looked away from the photo. His name was Alan Marsh. He was the winter maintenance man in 1987. He lost his wife in a car accident and came here to get away from it. "What happened to him?" Doris stood up. She collected Joel's coffee cup and plate. She walked to the door and stopped. "Room 217, she said quietly. "They found him in the bathtub. They said it was hypothermia. They said he must have run a cold bath and fallen asleep." She paused. "The water was not cold, Joel. When they found him, the water in that tub was warm. And he was smiling." She left. Joel sat in the maintenance office for a long time after that. He looked at the photograph, at Alan Marsh's face, at the eyes that held the same desperate hope that Joel had been carrying up 4 flights of stairs every night for 2 weeks. Then he looked at the dandelion seeds on his desk, 7 of them, perfect, white. Impossible. He opened the window and held them in his palm and let the November wind take them. Joel spent the rest of the day packing. He did not have much. He had arrived with 1 bag and he was leaving with 1 bag. He informed Patricia Voss that he was resigning, effective immediately. She did not seem surprised. She looked at him with that same careful, measuring expression she had worn during his interview, and she said, "I understand." And she did not ask why. Thomas Brennan was in the lobby when Joel came downstairs with his bag. Thomas stood up from his chair by the fireplace and walked over. "You're leaving," Thomas said. "Yeah." Thomas extended his hand. Joel shook it. "For what it's worth," Thomas said. "I'm sorry about your daughter." "Thank you. And for what it's worth, what you did up there. Walking away from that room, that is the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do in this building. Most people can't. Most people are not strong enough to choose reality over comfort." He paused. "Your daughter would be proud of you." Joel could not speak for a moment. He nodded. Squeezed Thomas's hand. Let go. He found Doris in the linen room. She was folding towels. She did not look up when he entered. "I'm going," he said. "I know. Come with me." Doris' hands stopped moving. She stood very still, holding a white towel half folded against her chest. "You know I can't," she said, "because of Frank." She said nothing. "Doris, it's not him. You know it's not him, the same way I know it wasn't Maya. You have to leave this place." Doris carefully, precisely finished folding the towel. She set it on the stack with the others. She smoothed it with her palm. Then she looked at Joel, and for the first time since he had met her, her face was open, unguarded. And beneath the toughness, beneath the 30 years of discipline and routine and resistance, there was a woman who was just as lost as he was. "Maybe someday," she said, "but not today." Joel nodded. He understood. He understood the way only someone who has stood in the same dark room and stared at the same impossible face can understand. The want does not go away. You just learn to carry it without letting it carry you. He hugged her. She was stiff at first, clearly not a woman accustomed to hugs, but after a moment she softened. She patted his back twice, firm, practical pats, the way a mother pats a child who has fallen down and needs to get back up. "Drive safe," she said. "And don't come back." Joel walked out the front door of the Stanley Hotel at 2:37 in the afternoon on November 21st. The sky was clear, the air was cold and sharp and smelled like pine. The mountains stood around the valley like sentinels, white-capped and silent. He walked to his truck, put his bag in the back, got in, started the engine. He did not look at the hotel in the rearview mirror. He was afraid that if he did, he would see a small face in a 4th-floor window watching him leave. And he was more afraid that he would not. He drove down the hill and through Estes Park and into Big Thompson Canyon. The road wound between high rock walls and the river ran alongside it, fast and cold, and heading somewhere with conviction. Joel drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and his mind slowly beginning to quiet. He stopped at a gas station in Loveland, filled the tank, went inside and bought a bottle of water and a pack of peanuts. When he came back out, the sun was starting to go down, turning the sky orange and pink along the western horizon. Joel leaned against his truck and looked at the sunset and thought about Maya. Not the Maya of room 418, not the thing in the blue pajamas with the dandelion and the wrong smile. The real Maya, his Maya. The one who named sidewalk cracks and talked to ladybugs and held his hand in a hospital bed and told him it was okay. He thought about what okay meant. He had spent 2 years rejecting that word. Refusing it, how could anything be okay when she was gone? How could the world keep turning and the sun keep setting and people keep buying gas and peanuts and going about their lives when Maya Whitmore was not in it anymore, but standing in that gas station parking lot, with the sky on fire and the air cooling and his heartbeat finally slowing to something that felt sustainable? Joel understood what she had been trying to tell him. Okay did not mean good. Okay did not mean painless. Okay did not mean forgetting. Okay meant surviving. Okay meant waking up tomorrow and doing it again. Okay meant carrying the weight without lying down under it. Maya, at 6 years old, dying in a hospital bed, had understood something that Joel, at 32, had been running from for 2 years. You can miss someone with your whole heart and still choose to live. Joel got back in his truck. He drove to Fort Collins. He pulled into the driveway of the house he had left 3 weeks earlier. The porch light was on. It was on a timer, always had been. Maya's drawings were still taped to the wall in her room. Her shoes were still by the front door, the little purple sneakers with the Velcro straps. Joel walked inside. He stood in the hallway. He looked at the shoes. Then he picked them up, gently, carefully, the way you pick up something precious. And he held them against his chest for a long time. Then he put them in a box, not to throw away, not to forget, but to keep safe. The way you keep something that matters in a place where it will not get damaged. A place where you can find it when you need it, but where it does not block the door anymore. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table. The house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet than the Stanley. It was not the deep, listening, hungry quiet of a building that wanted something from you. It was just silence, normal, ordinary silence, the silence of a house waiting for someone to fill it with noise again. Joel sipped his coffee. Outside the window, the last light of the day was fading. A few stars were appearing. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A car door closed. Life, ordinary life doing what it does. Joel picked up his phone. Scrolled through his contacts, found the name he was looking for. His thumb hovered over it. Serena. He had not called her in 4 months. Not since the separation, not since the silence swallowed everything. He did not know what he would say, did not know if she would answer. Did not know if anything between them could ever be repaired. But he thought about room 418. About the choice he had made in that dark room with the cold pressing in, and the thing wearing his daughter's face, asking him to stay. He had chosen to walk away. He had chosen reality over comfort, truth over illusion, survival over surrender. Calling Serena was the same kind of choice, harder maybe. Because at least in room 418, the worst that could happen was clear. With Serena, the worst that could happen was ambiguous and ordinary and human. She might not answer. She might answer and have nothing to say. She might answer and say something that made the wound worse. But she might also answer and say something that made it better. Joel pressed the button. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. Joel, her voice was careful, surprised, a little guarded. Hi, Serena. A pause. Are you okay? Joel looked at the window, at the stars, at the dark outline of the mountains in the distance, barely visible against the sky. No, he said, but I think I'm going to be. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, full silence, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I want to talk, Joel said, about Maya, about us, about everything. I'm not asking for anything, I need to talk. And I think maybe you do too. He heard her breathe, a long, slow breath. The kind of breath that comes after you have been holding something for a very long time, and you are finally letting it go. Yeah, Serena said, I do. Joel leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. And for the first time in 2 years, the silence inside his chest was not an absence. It was a space where something new could grow. Not something that replaced Maya, nothing could replace Maya. But something that existed alongside the grief instead of underneath it. Something small and fragile and new, like a dandelion seed catching the wind. 300 miles away, in room 418 of the Stanley Hotel, the moonlight fell through the window onto an empty bed. The room was cold, the air was still. No voice, no humming, no small figure standing by the glass. But on the window, at the height of a child's hand, there was a handprint. A small handprint, 5 fingers splayed wide, pressed against the glass from the inside. And if you looked closely, very closely, you might have noticed something